Sometimes, a message only takes 6 words to undo 32 years of trying. Mine ready, please. Skip Thanksgiving. We need space. I was standing in my Brooklyn apartment, morning coffee still warm in my hands, when it lit up on my phone. I stared at it for a moment too long, like I was reading a foreign language. I read it again. Then again. Dawn and Marlene Parker had sent it. No preface, no apology. Just a gentle shove out the door of a tradition I'd shown up for my entire life. That single line was supposed to sound polite, but what it really said was, "You don't belong, you're optional." I replied with just one word, "Enjoy." It was the most restrained word I've ever written, and also the most powerful. I'm Elena Parker. I'm 32, and until that Thursday morning, I thought being the capable daughter meant something. I thought staying quiet, being the helper, the giver, the always available one would eventually be noticed, appreciated, celebrated. Instead, I was told not to come, while my younger sister Samantha and her family were welcomed with open arms. There's a certain H that comes with being reliable. People start to think you don't need care, that you don't feel the cold. I felt it that morning, though. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones, the kind you can't wrap yourself out of. But it didn't break me. It cracked something open. They didn't know that just last month, I had bought a lodge in Vermont, a dream tucked away for over a decade. A quiet, snow-covered property with cedar beams and an old fireplace older than any of us. I hadn't told anyone, not because it was a secret, but because I wanted to share it on Thanksgiving. My way of showing, look, I made something beautiful. Maybe now you'll see me. Now, I was going to make it mine, without waiting for them to applaud. And that's when I decided, if they didn't want me at their table, I'd build my own. A table with no favorites, no hierarchy, just warmth, laughter, and real connection. I'd invite people who saw me for who I was, not who they wished I'd be. I'd celebrate Thanksgiving on my own terms, in my own home, and the people who came would come not out of duty, but because they wanted to. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been told you weren't needed? That your presence was optional? If that's you, stick with me. This story isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation, about taking back your seat at the table, even if it means building the whole damn table from scratch. If you've ever felt like the invisible one, the overlooked sibling, the one who always gave but never got, this story is for you. And if it resonates, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear this today. Maybe someone who, like me, needs to hear you are not too much, you are not hard to love, and you are allowed to choose peace. Let's begin. I wasn't always the one left out. There was a time when I believed my parents loved us both equally, me and my younger sister, Samantha. 5 years apart, yet we shared bunk beds, stories under the covers, matching Christmas pajamas. But as we got older, something shifted. The world tilted ever so slightly in Samantha's favor, and I learned that being capable was both blessing and a burden. At 16, I got my first job at a local diner, while Samantha got a sweet 16 party with fairy lights and a backyard band. I was wiping down tables and saving tips for college. I still remember the night I got my acceptance letter to Columbia. I had worked so hard. Grades, essays, scholarships. My dad read the letter, gave a proud nod, and said, "That's my girl." Then turned to help Samantha finish her biology project for her sophomore class. No one asked how I'd pay for tuition. They just assumed I'd figure it out. And I did. 2 jobs, 3 roommates, instant noodles for dinner more nights than I care to remember. Meanwhile, when Samantha got into Harvard a few years later, Mom cried tears of joy. Dad opened a bottle of champagne and quietly told me they'd help cover her tuition. Just so she can focus, you know? I told myself it made sense. She was younger. She wasn't as strong as me. That word, strong, became a blanket thrown over every disappointment, every dismissal. She's just more sensitive. You don't need as much. You're so good at handling things, Elena. But what no one realized was even strong people need to be held. even capable daughters get tired. I didn't speak up. Not then. Not when they bought her a car for graduation while I was still using the subway. Not when they flew out to help her move apartments and missed my first big product launch. Not when they told me, at my own birthday dinner, that they had to leave early for Samantha's urgent work thing. I stayed quiet because I thought love was earned. That if I just kept showing up, kept being dependable, they'd finally see me. But every time I poured more of myself into them, I got less in return. One Thanksgiving, I brought my boyfriend Daniel to meet them. We were seated at the kids' table. Samantha's in-laws got the good seats. When I mentioned my promotion, my mom said, "That's lovely, dear. But let's not make a fuss. Not everyone's career is soaring right now." I laughed it off. But that night, Daniel said something I never forgot. "You know they don't see you." Not really. We broke up a month later, not just because of them, but they didn't help. Still, I stayed. I showed up. Every holiday, every emergency. When Samantha's daughter got sick, I sent money. When her husband lost his job, I covered rent. And now, standing in my silent apartment, rereading that message, I finally understood that they didn't see me because I never asked them to. I had let them treat me as background support. And now I had a choice. Not to leave them behind, but to stop leaving myself behind. This time, I was going to choose me. The same afternoon I got that message, I found something unexpected. I was clearing out old boxes in my hallway closet, trying to distract myself, I suppose, when a thin envelope slipped out from an old photo album. It was yellowed, addressed in delicate handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It was from my grandmother, Nana June. She'd passed when I was 17, just before I graduated high school. But there she was, in faded blue ink. "Elena, my firefly, if you're reading this, I'm probably no longer around to say it in person. But I need you to remember something. You deserve a seat at any table you choose. And if no one makes room, build your own." I sat on the floor and cried. The kind of crying that doesn't make noise, but empties you out. How did she know? How did she always know? That single letter, tucked away for 15 years, felt more like love than anything I'd gotten in the last 5. It reminded me why I'd bought the lodge in Vermont, why I'd kept it a secret. This dream wasn't born out of revenge or vanity. It was something else, something deeper. I first saw the lodge on a trip upstate, in late autumn 2 years ago. It wasn't fancy. Just a weathered cedar structure tucked between pines with stone chimneys and creaky floors. But I remember standing on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the ridge, and thinking I could breathe here. So I started saving. Quietly, diligently. Every bonus, every freelance gig, every late-night product sprint, I funneled it toward that dream, and last month, it finally happened. 650,000. Mine. I hadn't told anyone. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wanted to share it when it mattered. On Thanksgiving, I imagined my parents walking in, wide-eyed, Samantha's kids playing hide and seek in the loft upstairs, a roaring fire, a long table, candles, laughter, a family that felt right. But the text changed everything. Now, it wasn't about showing them anything. It was about honoring myself. So I made a decision. Instead of waiting for someone to invite me in, I'd extend my own invitation, not out of bitterness, but because I was done begging for crumbs. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started drafting a list, not of people I was supposed to invite, but of those who had seen me, really seen me. My cousins, Leo and Grace, my Aunt Corinne, who once told me I reminded her of her younger self, my college roommate, Beth, who sent me postcards every Christmas even when I forgot to reply. And then something strange happened. I picked up a pen and began to write. Not emails, not texts, but a letter. To my parents. I didn't plan to send it. But I needed to say the things I'd never had the courage to say. I've spent 3 decades trying to be enough for you. And I've finally realized I already am. You may not see it, but I do. And this year, I'm not asking for a seat at your table. I'm making my own. I folded it. Tucked it into a drawer. Maybe they'd read it someday. Maybe not, but I had written it. And somehow, that was enough. Because the moment I chose to create something for myself, without permission, was the moment I began to heal. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. For once, it wasn't for work or to meet some deadline. It was because I couldn't stop thinking about the message, about the silence that followed, about that one word reply in joy. I hadn't heard back from them. No follow-up, no questions, just silence. And somehow, that silence said more than any words ever could. It said, "We didn't think you'd mind." It said, "You always bounce back." It said, "You're used to being excluded." And for a long time, that was true. I was used to it. The mist, the early exits, the way my achievements became afterthoughts while Samantha's every step was front and center. But this time, something felt different. I wasn't just hurt. I was awake to the pattern, to the quiet dismissal dressed up as politeness, to the way I'd been conditioned to smile through being ignored. I stared out my window at the city waking up, taxi horns, distant sirens, steam rising from rooftops, and then, like a whisper rising from deep inside, the thought came, what if I didn't fight to be seen anymore? What if I just walked away and built something better? Not in anger, not in spite, but in peace. I grabbed a fresh notebook and wrote 3 words at the top: Thanksgiving, my way, and then I started planning. I called Aunt Corinne first. She didn't even let me finish. "You say the word, honey, and I'll be there with my cranberry chutney and my loud opinions." I laughed harder than I had in days. Next was Grace, my cousin in Chicago. "Thanksgiving in Vermont. You serious? I'll cancel everything. Count me in." One by one, the names turned into voices, and the voices turned into yeses. Not because they pitied me, not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they wanted to. They wanted to sit at a table where no one had to fight for attention, where warmth wasn't rationed, where being seen wasn't a performance. I called Beth last. She cried before I even said hello. "I always knew one day you'd build something like this. You've been holding everyone up for so long, Elena. It's your turn now." As the list grew, so did my spirit, not out of revenge, but out of restoration. And yet there was one name I hesitated to write. Samantha. I didn't want to relive old patterns. I didn't want the shadow of comparison in my new space. But I also didn't want to build a table rooted in exclusion. So I left her name blank, for now. That evening, I drove up to Vermont to check on the lodge. The leaves were turning. Amber crimson, soft gold. The drive felt like moving through a painting. When I pulled up, the place looked exactly as I remembered. Quiet. Still. Mine. I walked through the room slowly. Ran my fingers along the banister. Lit a small fire in the hearth. The house breathed around me, like it had been waiting. And as I sat at the long wooden table that would soon host the people who chose me, I whispered to myself, I don't need their invitation. I've made my own. For the first time in years, I felt full. Not because someone finally made room for me, but because I'd made room for myself. The invitations went out the next day. Handwritten, sealed with wax, because something about this felt sacred. I wasn't just inviting people to dinner. I was inviting them into a new version of my life. Within a week, the RSPs came rolling in, Leo and Grace. My cousins were bringing board games and matching scarves. Beth asked if she could bake her signature pecan pie and crash in the loft upstairs. Aunt Corinne sent a voice message. I'm packing my overnight bag and 2 bottles of Pinot. Also, I'm stealing your lodge recipe for my next book. I smiled at every response. But the one that truly caught me off guard wasn't a letter. It was a phone call from Jason, Samantha's husband. I almost didn't answer. But something in me whispered, just listen. Elena? He said carefully, like stepping into unknown waters. I heard from Leo about the lodge, about Thanksgiving. I stayed quiet. He went on, I know this is unexpected, but Samantha doesn't know I'm calling. I needed to ask if there's any chance we could come. My stomach twisted. The thought of Samantha walking through those doors, bringing her old spotlight with her. I didn't know if I had the strength to risk it. Jason must have sensed the hesitation. She's different lately, he added. She's been quiet. And honestly, She cried when she saw that message your parents sent you. I blinked. I don't want to speak for her, he continued, but I think she's starting to see things she didn't before. I sat down slowly. It wasn't that I didn't want Samantha there. I just didn't want that version of her, the one shaped by favoritism and silent rivalry. I'll think about it, I said honestly.
There's space, but I need to know it'll feel safe, not like the old days. I get it, Jason replied. Whatever you decide, we respect it. After we hung up, I lit a candle and opened my journal. That letter I had written to my parents was still tucked inside, unread, and now another letter formed. This one, to myself. You do not have to repeat the old patterns. You're not recreating a table with a new tablecloth. You are building a different room entirely. I took a deep breath. Maybe healing didn't mean shutting people out. Maybe it meant letting them in. But on your terms. That night I called Jason back. You're welcome to come, I said, but only if she understands. This is my space. My Thanksgiving. She doesn't get to make it about her. I understand, he said softly. And I think she will too. The following week was a blur of preparation. I worked with a local carpenter to expand the dining table, hung fairy lights across the exposed beams, stocked the pantry with Vermont maple syrup and sweet potatoes from the market. I even ordered flannel pajamas for all the kids who were coming. Then I found a recipe card, tucked in my grandmother's cookbook, pumpkin cornbread stuffing. The smell alone brought tears to my eyes. I baked a test batch late that night, the kitchen filled with warm, familiar scent. And I stood at the window, watching snow begin to fall, knowing this was no longer a dream. This was happening. A table was being built, one invitation at a time. And maybe, just maybe, even Samantha would find her place at it. They started arriving the day before Thanksgiving. First was Aunt Corin, wrapped in a plaid coat the color of cranberry juice, dragging a vintage suitcase and carrying a casserole dish like it was sacred cargo. "Oh, sweetheart," she said the moment I opened the door. "This place, it smells like cinnamon and peace. What have you done?" I laughed, took her coat, and led her inside. The fire crackled gently in the hearth, and sunlight pooled across the wide, plank floors. Every candle I lit, every string light I hung, had been for this moment. Next came Leo and Grace. They burst through the front door with snow still clinging to their boots and arms full of grocery bags, laughter trailing behind them. "We stopped at the co-op," Grace said. "Local cider, 6 kinds of cheese, and a suspiciously expensive tart." Beth arrived just after dark. Her suitcase was tiny, but her pie carrier, the size of a small dog. And then came Jason's car. I heard the tires before I saw the headlights. A slow crunch over gravel that made my stomach flip. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped outside. The air smelled of pine and something sweeter, maybe hope. The car door opened, and 2 small bodies flew toward me. "Elena!" It was Samantha's kids, Mia and Owen. They hugged my legs tightly, their faces pink with cold. "Aunt Elena," Mia said breathlessly. "You have a swing! And it's snowing! This is better than Grandma's?" I laughed and hugged them back, then looked up. Samantha stepped out slowly. Her face was unreadable. She stood for a moment, just looking at me, and then she smiled. Soft, tentative, real. "Thanks for letting us come," she said. Her voice wasn't confident, not like it used to be. "It's good to see you," I said honestly. And it was. That night, we made hot cocoa and ate leftover stew around the fireplace. Everyone wore slippers. No one asked about seating charts or who brought what. There was no performance, just presence. When I peeked into the den before bed, I found Grace showing Mia how to fold napkins into swans. Owen had fallen asleep with Leo's scarf wrapped around his head like a pirate. And Samantha. She was in the kitchen, drying dishes with Beth, laughing softly about something I couldn't quite hear. I stood in the hallway, hand on the doorframe, and took it all in. The sound of peace. The feeling of enough. Thanksgiving morning, I woke before dawn. Snow had dusted the windowsills. The kitchen was quiet, still smelling faintly of cloves and wood smoke. I brewed coffee, then stepped onto the back porch, wrapped in a blanket. The lodge overlooked a small meadow, now blanketed in white. No cars, no city noise, just me and the morning. Soon, one by one, they began to stir. Uncle Paul arrived from the nearby inn, bringing pastries and stories. Jason made scrambled eggs, while Leo set up a speaker with soft jazz. Grace showed the kids how to make place cards using leaves and markers. The table began to come to life. We lined it with mason jars filled with cranberries and candles. Each plate had a linen napkin, tied with twine. It was simple, imperfect, beautiful. Samantha approached me as I was slicing pears for the salad. "Do you need help?" she asked. I paused, then nodded. She reached for a knife, and for a few minutes, we just worked, side by side. No tension, no shadows. "You did something really beautiful here," she said. "Thank you." "I mean it," she continued. I didn't understand what you carried all these years. I thought you were just fine with everything." "I wasn't," I said gently. But I didn't know how to say it. "Well," she said, exhaling, "I'm sorry. For a lot of things. Especially not seeing you." I looked at her, really looked. The girl who once got everything handed to her, and the woman now standing in front of me, less certain, but more human. "I see you now, too," I said. And I meant it. As guests found their seats, I remained standing for a moment, at the head of the table. The firelight danced on everyone's faces. The food smelled like home. The air shimmered with something unspoken, but felt. Belonging. I lifted my glass. "To new traditions," I said. "To showing up for each other. And to tables we build ourselves, out of wood, love, and second chances." They raised their glasses, one by one. Samantha's eyes met mine across the table. She smiled. Later that evening, after the dishes were done, and the kids were tucked into their bunk beds, I stepped outside alone. The stars were bright, scattered across the dark sky like secrets too sacred to tell, and I knew, deep in my bones, that this was the beginning. Not just of a new holiday, but of a new life, one where I no longer had to shrink to fit. One where peace wasn't borrowed. It was chosen. And I had chosen it. It was just after dessert when my phone started buzzing. At first, I ignored it. I was too busy watching Owen and Mia try to balance marshmallows on their noses while Aunt Corrine howled with laughter. The lodge had never felt more alive. Then Beth's phone buzzed. Then Leo's. Then Grace's. One by one, everyone paused. Uncle Paul looked up from his mug. "You're all getting the same thing, huh?" I glanced at my screen. It was my mother. "Where is everyone?" "We're supposed to be starting dinner. No one's here." "Why isn't Samantha answering?" Another message popped up. "Are you with Elena?" Did she plan something? I felt the weight of those words, but oddly, I didn't feel fear. Just clarity. They didn't know. They truly didn't realize the ripple they had caused when they sent that text. Grace handed me her phone silently. Same message. So did Beth. It was spreading. They were realizing that everyone had chosen to be here. Samantha was standing in the hallway with Jason. Their kids were asleep upstairs, wrapped in soft flannel. She looked at me, questioning. I nodded. She picked up her phone and called. Put it on speaker. Hi, Mom. There was a breath on the other end. Then, Samantha, where are you? We've been waiting for hours. Your father is furious. We're in Vermont, at Elena's. Silence. Long. Dense. What do you mean? Mom said finally. Elena's in Brooklyn. She didn't come. I stepped forward so she could hear me clearly. No, Mom. I'm here, in Vermont. At my lodge? Your what? My lodge. The one I bought last month? Another silence. Why would you do this? She asked, her voice suddenly tight. Because you told me not to come, I replied. You asked for space. So I gave it to you. But we didn't mean for you to take the whole family. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply. You never meant to hurt me, I said gently. But you did, for years. And maybe you didn't notice it. But I did. Every time you left me out. Every time you made me feel small. Jason stepped forward, quietly placing his hand on Samantha's shoulder. And, for the record, he said, we wanted to be here. We chose this. You're all being ridiculous. My father's voice cut in. This is not how families act. No, I said. It's not how your version of family acts. But this is how mine does. More silence, a door closing in the background. And then the line went dead. Jason turned off the speaker. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Grace said, softly, well, that went better than expected. We laughed. It broke the tension like a champagne cork. The rest of the evening unfolded gently. Soft jazz, mulled cider, a second round of dessert because why not? But later, as I was folding blankets in the den, Samantha came in holding something. It was a letter, the one I'd written weeks ago. She had found it tucked in the kitchen drawer. You should send this, she said. I don't know if they'd read it. That's not the point, she said. Send it for you. I took it from her, felt its weight in my hand, and I realized something speaking my truth wasn't about changing them. It was about freeing myself. A year passed, quietly, then all at once. Seasons changed. Leaves fell and bloomed again. And so did something in me. The lodge in Vermont had become more than a refuge. It was a living thing. Walls full of memory, floors softened by footsteps, air scented with cinnamon, pine and peace. For 11 months, my parents stayed distant. There were a few texts, mostly logistical, birthday acknowledgments, brief replies to photos I sent of the kids or the first snowfall, but no real conversation. Until late October, a letter came in the mail. From my mother. It was handwritten, 4 pages, and it began simply, Elena, I read your letter. I read it more than once. And I won't lie, it hurt. Because you were right. And we didn't know how much we weren't seeing you. She didn't apologize in grand gestures. But her words held weight. She wrote about her fears, her failures, her regrets. But what struck me most was the final line. If there is still space at your table, we would be honored to sit beside you. I read that sentence 3 times, then folded the letter and placed it in the drawer where mine had once lived. This time, the drawer wasn't full of silence. It held something new, a beginning. So I called, and I invited them, not because I forgot, but because I had forgiven. They arrived the day before Thanksgiving, just as the first snow began to fall. My father stepped out of the car first, holding my mother's suitcase. He looked older, softer somehow, and when they stepped inside, it wasn't like last year. There were no raised eyebrows, no unspoken comparisons, just quiet awe. "This is extraordinary, Elena," my mother said. "You've created something beautiful." I smiled. Samantha arrived soon after, arms full of pies in hand, knit scarves for the kids. She hugged me tight. No words were needed. That night, the lodge came alive again. The same faces, the same laughter, the same table. But somehow, everything was different. My parents sat in the middle, not at the head. There were no long toasts, no expectations. Just passing dishes, shared stories, and the sound of people trying again. After dinner, I stepped outside, coffee in hand. The stars shimmered above the snow-covered field. My father joined me. He didn't say much, but after a long pause, he said, "You were always strong, Elena." But I didn't know strength could look like this. I nodded. Sometimes love doesn't arrive loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it shows up years late, with hands in its pockets and eyes downcast. But it shows up. That Thanksgiving, I learned that healing doesn't mean erasing the past. It means letting it breathe, letting it speak, then choosing something better. We ended the night with a photo in front of the fireplace, like before. But this time, I stood in the center. Not because I demanded it, but because everyone had quietly placed me there. I don't know what future holidays will look like. Families are complicated. People change slowly. But this much is clear. I am no longer waiting to be chosen. I choose myself. And from that choice, everything else flows. So, if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever wondered if you deserve a seat at the table, let me remind you you do. And if the table doesn't have room, build a new one. Invite people who see you, who cherish you, who ask how you're really doing, then stay to hear the answer. Because sometimes the family we long for is the one we build ourselves, piece by piece, choice by choice, and in that building we find home. Have you ever had to start your own tradition? Had to walk away from what hurt just to find what heals? I'd love to hear your story. Please share it in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that you are seen. You are enough, and you are not alone.